Hi, I'm Shawna.
And I'm Liz.
Welcome to Getting Bookish, a weekly podcast where we will talk about different book-related topics, let you know what we're reading, and even answer Q&As from you.
Be sure to visit our website, gettingbookish.com, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Getting Bookish. If you enjoy our podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and review, which helps us to be seen by other book lovers.
With all that said, we hope you'll enjoy Getting Bookish with us.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody. Hello, friends. I hope that you guys are doing well. And if you noticed, we did not have a podcast out last Tuesday. And I'm putting her on the spot now. Liz, you want to tell us what happened?
So, my fault. I knew that we were going to record. I've been in the middle of moving. You notice I have a new background yet again. By the time we're back, I'll be in my new place. Then there'll be books behind me. It'll be fabulous. But I knew we were going to record, and so I had kept all of my podcast equipment out, separate, like not packed in a box to have it all ready. And somehow, even with all of my very best intentions, I still lost my microphone. So just the microphone piece. I had the stand, I had all of the other things, just the microphone, and I ended up finding it in a shoe in my closet, which makes zero sense whatsoever, but I do have it now. So as a result, we get to have two podcasts this week.
Yes, so it's a 2 for Tuesday.
Yay!
And didn't you say you only heard it because there was like a necklace or earrings in there as well?
Right. So so it was a Doc Marten boot, and the microphone was in there, and then this pair of like tin earrings that I have, and I was moving my shoes around in my closet, and like it made a noise, and I was like, is the shoe broken? Like, shoes don't make noise. They're not tap shoes. And it was because the microphone was hitting those earrings.
That is hilarious. Because when else would you have found that? I mean, when would you wear those shoes next?
Right, like fall, because it's hot right now. I'm not going to wear combat boots around.
You
but,
would not have found your microphone forever.
No, I know. Which means I would have had to have purchased a new one because
yes, that would be frustrating.
I only have a very small amount of patience to locate things. So, but it's now found.
I just thought that was such a funny story. So anyway, it is found and we can carry on. But today's podcast is really special. So we are going to hear some questions from you guys that you have asked us, and you've asked us via our messenger on Facebook or our email address, which is gettingbookish.info@gmail.com. And so we just picked out a couple questions, and we're going to answer them to the best of our abilities. And if you would like your question on our podcast, I think the easiest and most fun way to do that would be if you could go to where you leave reviews and post your question there, and then we can give you a shout out and read your question. Or if you just want to tell us, I don't know, your cat's name or your favorite book or a book that you hate, anything, we'll just pluck that off and give you a shout out, and a shout out to Fifi the cat. And we would love to do that. And I think we could also do shout outs to some of our really great responders on our Facebook page too.
Definitely.
Because those are the people that keep our Facebook going and live, and we really appreciate you guys.
Yes, we do. We love getting to chat with you guys and really making our page a bookish community. So
yes.
We're so thankful that you guys are doing that with us. So our first question is from Amanda in Sacramento, California. And she asks, why do you love your favorite genre? Which is a really great question.
It is. It
Shawna.
seems like I'm going first. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it seems like it's such an easy question. I can't wait to see what you say. But
and we'll find out right after.
So my favorite genre, obviously, is historical fiction. The reason why I love it is because I love seeing the differences of time periods, and I love reading the descriptions of the way they dressed. I loved hearing the way that they talk. even the way they did their hair. I like seeing the difference of amenities that they don't have compared to what we have nowadays. I also love learning about different parts of history, and I know that most of the books that I read are fiction, but I think that they're really great, like, what is it called? Like a jumping board?
Yeah.
To digging deeper into, more nonfiction books. Like, I love reading World War II books, and that has spiraled me into reading nonfiction and memoir about actual events. So I love that, yes, it's fiction, but it takes me to places that I can learn actual history, and I just find that, really enticing. But yeah.
I love that.
So how about you?
So my favorite genre, again, no shock to anyone, I don't think, is fantasy. And I think that I've loved that genre my entire life without even knowing it was a genre, because as a child, I loved to read fairy tales and stories that were written like fairy tales. And then for a while when I was a kid, I liked to read like Victorian set stories, or like stories set like in the Renaissance. And I think it's because they had that kind of fairy tale feel. But now I very much focus on things that are magical, and I really enjoy that. And I think I love it because it's a true escape for me. It's a completely different world, and their problems are like dragons are attacking. They're not the problems that we have. And so I think that when I read, I love that escape, and fantasy really provides that, because you're just in a completely different magical imaginary world.
So our second question is coming from Erica from Haverhill, Massachusetts, and she is asking, what were the first books you read in your favorite genre? Ooh, Liz, the first books.
So I think, like I said, I think that this has been a favorite genre of mine for most of my life. So I got out a couple of books that I read as a child, fantasy, like Alice in Wonderland. And then I love fairy tales. And if you're looking for a really great, like, grouping of fairy tales,
the original.
This book is fantastic. It's the complete first edition, the original folk and fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, translated and edited by Jack Zipes. So Jack Zipes is like kind of the modern researcher of folk and fairy tales, and he translated them from the original German himself.
Okay.
He was looking for a very like accurate translation. So anyway, for me, like, Alice and fairy tales were kind of the start of my fantasy obsession. But I think more recently, so I was looking back at the beginning of my blog, which was in 2013. Excuse me. I'm pretty sure it was 2013. So the first book I ever reviewed is this book, Cinder, and it's actually a retelling of Cinderella, and the whole series is like that. So that's one of mine in the fantasy. And so The City of Bones by Cassandra Clare is another one of like the first fantasy books I read. But then, of course, we can't forget.
I was waiting for it.
Harry Potter, like the fantasy book every child reads, even if they don't like fantasy. I think this is where both it started as a really popular genre for YA books, but like obviously Harry Potter, I'm such a Potterhead in general. But I think those were some of the first books that I read in the fantasy genre that really kind of hooked me and got me, so that was like all I was reading. So what about you? What were some of the first historical fiction?
First historical fiction. So obviously I have a book that takes place World War II. This is Echoes by Danielle Steele. And I was a huge Danielle Steele fan, huge, because I think my mom had all the books, so then I started reading them. But I like old Danielle Steele because I don't think she writes her newer ones. I don't know. The writing is very different. And
That's pretty common.
Okay, her older ones rip my heart out. And so I love the older ones. So Echoes. Then I have, one of my favorites. This is Jude Devereaux. This is when I read a lot of like historical romance, fiction. This is A Knight in Shining Armor. What I loved about this one was that it's one of those time travel type books.
Fun.
So this one goes back to like, it goes from present day to like medieval period. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Then I have the Russians collection. It's a collection of 8 books, and it's written by Michael Phillips and Judith Pella. Have you heard of it? It's a Christian series.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Yeah, and it starts I want to say it's pre-revolutionary Russia, but it follows people throughout like the decades and into new lives and follows people up. I can't remember where it ends off because I read these so long ago, but I was just fascinated that the characters just kind of flow throughout all of these 8 books, and I thought it was fantastic. The next ones that I love, so I read a lot of historical fiction Christian novels. That's what I feel like really spurred me towards like all things historical fiction, because I also really loved Yukon Quest. So that was Treasures of the North, Ashes and Ice, Rivers of Gold. And that's by Tracy Peterson. And that takes place in the Alaskan gold rush in like the 1800s. And I just love following these 3 women and seeing how they lived through this like really, really hard time for anybody, especially ladies. Right. So those were my books, and it started out with the Christian historical fiction, probably because I was younger, and so those were cleaner books. And
right. I read a lot of those too.
Yeah, and
a lot of those titles. I was like, oh yeah, I read those.
And then I started getting into the Danielle Steele, and now I'm reading, the current, whatever historical fiction books there are, but. Those are mine. And let's go on to the next question.
So question 3 is from my friend Camille in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And she asks, what book did someone recommend to you that you thought you would like and didn't? And then what did you say to them?
Okay. So I really haven't had too many people recommend books to me, which is, now that I'm thinking about it, is maybe odd. I don't know. Or maybe I just don't remember. But the one that really stands out to me is when my friend, a really, really close friend to me, so you really trust their opinion,
right,
told me that I absolutely had to read The Host by Stephanie Meyer. And I think we've talked about this in a podcast before.
I've read it also.
Yes. And because it came off the back of Twilight and all that stuff, which I was a huge super nerd fan. And so she said, you have to read it. And so I gave it a shot. I gave it another shot. And I was just so bored. And I just said to her, Amanda, I cannot read this. And she was like, but it's so good. You just have to get through like 3/4 of the book. And I'm like, really? It's a big book. I'm like, no, you can just tell me what happens. I can't read it. And I felt so bad because she was so excited and passionate about it. But I just told her, I was like, I'm so sorry. I tried. I just can't.
Right. So it's kind of funny because Camille, my friend who asked the question, she and I were actually talking about this very subject. And as soon as she said this, she was like, don't say Ender's Game, because she knew that was going to be my answer. So 90% of the books that I read, she likes, and vice versa. And then we have like these few other books that I like and she doesn't care for. And so when she recommended Ender's Game to me, I was like, it's like her favorite book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, awesome, I'm so excited to read this. And I didn't enjoy it at all.
Did you finish it?
I did finish it.
Okay.
I really wanted to find out why she loved it so much because she identifies it as like her favorite book, or at least one of her favorites. And so I read the whole thing and she's so excited to talk about it. And I was like, this was terrible.
Did you really say that to her?
I'm pretty sure I said that to her because we have that relationship where like I can be like, this book you recommended was awful.
That's amazing.
And she's told me the same thing. Like, I've been so excited about books, and she's like, why did you even like that? But yeah, and I think it's always a little hard to hear that someone doesn't like a book that you love.
Right.
Especially if you read a lot of the same things.
Right.
So, ooh, it's a hard question, but I think, and you know, if you have a relationship with someone that isn't really strong, don't tell them you hated their favorite book.
Right. Maybe sugarcoat it a little bit.
I read it. It wasn't necessarily my favorite. Like,
maybe pick something that you didn't hate in it to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, and make it brief.
But if they're a close friend, just be honest.
Yeah. Okay, so our fourth question is a tough one.
Uh-oh.
This is from Tracy in Naples, Florida. And she wants to know, who is your favorite author? And what book would you recommend to that author to read?
This is a really hard question.
Very hard.
And just for full transparency, we aren't hearing these questions for the very first time, which means that I had a lot of time to think about this because it's hard.
Yeah, I almost totally backed out of this one.
Yeah. So already I just chose a favorite author because I think she is my favorite author right now. So my favorite author is Maggie Stiefvater, and she has written possibly my favorite series, although we know that you can't even say things like that. But and it's called The Raven Cycle. But so she writes fantasy books, and they're really well written. The world is well developed. The rules of magic in the world are well developed. The characters are well developed. And so I was like, okay, what would I recommend to her? And so I think my recommendation to her would be The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. Have you read this?
No, but I feel like I need to. I mean, I like princesses and goblins. What is this?
Right. So I read this for the first time. I remember I borrowed a copy from my friend when I was probably like 11 or 12. And it's a fairy tale. It's a fantasy book about this princess she was probably like 10 or 11. Like maybe we were the same age. And she gets kidnapped by these goblins. And Curdy, this boy from her town, ends up rescuing her. The book is quite old. I don't feel like I'm spoiling it for anyone, but it's just a really fun story about good versus evil. And Maggie Stiefvater has written some other books that kind of revive old stories, and I think it would be really fun if she wrote a book like a modern kind of retelling of this. So that's why I would recommend that to her.
Awesome.
For very selfish reasons.
I feel like mine is not as in-depth as yours, but I'm just happy I came up with something.
Right. It's the impossible question.
It is. I was just going to say, it feels like the impossible question too, because if we can't answer what's your favorite book, how is it any easier to answer who's your favorite author? So that was really tough for me because I kind of went with an author who I am currently falling in love with, and that is Kristen Hanna. I read The Nightingale, and then I read The Great Alone, and I feel like, I know that's only 2 books, but there's something about her writing style, I talked about this before, that really, really plays to my reading style. It's just like that comfy pair of pants. Like you put on and you're like, oh, I could do this for 5,000 pages. Like no sweat. I am not overwhelmed by any length of book she writes now because I know I will enjoy it. So for her, and I already said this book before, I would recommend the Yukon series, which was written by Tracy Patterson, a Christian series that I just said about the gold rush in the 1800s. And the reason I say that, because I was making the link from The Great Alone, which takes place in Alaska. And I just loved her detail and her in-depth description of Alaska and the love that she has for the state. And I just think that the Great Alone book itself really plays to the purest type of love that you could have. And I really feel that with the Yukon Quest. That's what I would recommend to her.
Our next question is from Sally in Montrose, Colorado. And she asks, how do you find time to read when you're busy?
So for this particular one, I have just 3 things that I could tell somebody. The first one is going to be have an audiobook. And you can get free ones from the library. Just always have an audiobook going. You can listen to it while you're grocery shopping. You can listen to it while you're driving. You can listen to it at, the dentist appointment while you're waiting to go in. Just listen to it, close your eyes, relax, and listen to it. You can listen to an audiobook in, 5-minute spans, 10-minute spans. Even if it takes you a long time, you're just listening to a book. Pick a good one that is enjoyable for you to hear and listen to. The next one is to carry a book with you everywhere you go, because you'll be surprised at how many times you're waiting somewhere, again, at the dentist appointment or whatever, and you're just waiting. And yeah, you could play on your phone or you could be reading. There's always pockets of time that you can be reading. If you have a kid in school and you're in those long pickup lines or drop-off lines, I feel like carrying a book with you can de-stress you for the times when you're like, oh, I have to wait here for 45 minutes, You can turn that around and say, oh my goodness, 45 minutes, I get to read my book. And the third one is, this is a little bit touchy, but I would just ask you to kind of assess your Facebook time. How much time do you spend scrolling Facebook at night or even during the day or wherever you are? How much time do you spend mindlessly going through Facebook? Of course, there's times when you're, actively posting or you want to catch up on your family. But I know sometimes I've been caught up in watching like a cat video and then kids falling down. And then like 3 hours later, I'm like, I could have finished an entire book right now. So maybe just kind of reassess your social media time and turn even just a quarter of that time into book time. So those are kind of my 3 tips.
I like that. So I think that kind of my knee-jerk reaction was I don't always. Mm-hmm. I don't always find time to read. Like this past kind of month and a half, I've been moving, and I was just so tired that even listening to an audiobook, I just wasn't really in the mood. Mm-hmm. And I think that's okay. Yeah. I think it's okay to be like, you know what? I'm not really in the mood to enjoy a story.
I can
right
see that.
Now.
Because then you're not going to take it in.
Right. And so I think that it's okay to say sometimes, you know what? I don't want to read right now, or listen, as the case may be, for while I was packing, because it seemed like, why am I not finishing like 10 books this month? Because I'm just like at home doing things. But I think it was just kind of, my brain was tired. But I try to prioritize my reading time. And so if I'm watching a show on television, like, yes, I could sit down and watch the whole season in 3 days. But if I do that, that means that for 3 days, I'm not prioritizing reading. And so I definitely try to at least create some balance. And I think that's what you were saying with Facebook is, like, see where you're spending, like, giant pockets of time and say, hey, part of that time, I could be doing, like, something that I know I enjoy more, but I don't necessarily prioritize all the time. So I think it's just kind of looking at that.
Yeah, and even if you make little goals for yourself, if you say, okay, I'm just going to read 1 chapter a night. Yeah. A lot of times that's a full book in a month.
Yeah, definitely.
So it might seem daunting when you have that book, but if you just break it down, look at the chapters and kind of make a goal for yourself. When do I want to finish this book? And that means I have to read how much each day. And, you don't have to be a stickler about it, but if you do want to, a long time ago, sometimes it would take me 3 or 4 months to finish a book because I was not in the season of reading. And I think about that, I'm like, how in the world did I remember this book that I start in 1 month and finish 4 months later? So our final question is coming from Jamie in Trenton, New Jersey. And she is asking, what is your go-to baby shower book present? I love this question.
Oh, I love this too, because that's usually my go-to gift at a baby shower is I'm going to bring a book. My go-to gift is Press Here by Hervé Toulet, and it's translated from French, surprisingly, with that name. But it's such a cute interactive book, and they just recently made it into a board book, which makes it super perfect.
We have
it. Yeah, yes, I love it. I love it. And if you like those ones, Tap the Magic Tree is also a really fun one in that same fashion where it's very interactive. And the other ones that I really like are called the Indestructibles. Mm-hmm. They're made out of like Tyvek instead of paper.
Okay.
And so you can't rip them. You can't get them you can get them soaking wet, and they're totally fine. And they weigh almost nothing. So they're really easy to keep like in your purse or in your diaper bag. And so I like to gift those also. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of my go-to baby shower choices. So Shawna, what are yours?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm about to hit you with a stack here because
I love it.
I could not pick. I will try to go through these as fast as possible. And I probably would not have all of these if I didn't have 4 kids. But after having them, I'm like, I wish somebody would have given me these. So this is what I wish somebody would have given me. And this is what I will be giving as my presents. The first one, it's not so much for the kid, but I really love this one. It's called Simplicity Parenting. And what I do is, I love this book so much, so much. It's all about don't worry about buying all the toys and all the gadgets and all that stuff. Just be with your child because the time is so fleeting. And enjoy the time with your child. And so what I do, you can see my little markers here and here. This is how I will gift it to somebody. And inside will be some things that are highlighted that I really, knowing the person, I think will really hit them. And that they'll be really able to connect. So a little personal touch on it. The next one, I didn't know which one to choose. I wouldn't give all 3 of these to somebody. But these are about being a read aloud family. So this is Sarah Mackenzie's Read Aloud Family, Jim Trelease, the Read Aloud Handbook, and then Gladys Hunt, Honey for the Child's Heart. And these are just, what I like about these is that it explains the importance of reading to your children and how that can create such a wonderful bond between you two. I wish I could go back in time and read even one of these books before I had the children, because I feel like, especially when you're a new parent, and you have twins upon twins like I did, or even just your first child, you're like, oh, it's story time. I just want to put the kid in bed and go downstairs. But after reading this, it just gave me such a new outlook on, no, this is a special time. This is not a chore. This is a bonding time, and this will last with them throughout their life. So I like those. As far as a super sappy book, if you want to make somebody cry, this one is called Someday. My children make me read this to them because they think it's hilarious that I can't make it through without crying. And I can't.
So cute.
So it's all about, it's little. It's about this mom who has a baby, and she's just like, oh, holding your hand, someday you're going to cross the street alone. Someday you're going to have your own house. Someday. And then all the way at the end, it's like, someday you'll be taking care of me, and then someday you'll have to live with just my memories. And I'm like, just stop it. Just stop. I can't even talk about it. So I'm almost tempted to make my niece read this at her baby shower. So, because I'm that cruel.
Just to pick on her a little bit.
The next one, The Great Big Treasury of Beatrix Potter. So I love, obviously, Peter Rabbit. It's got great pictures. A poem, a poetry book. This is one of my favorites, A Family of Poems, Carolyn Kennedy. And again, it's just got some classic poetry. I think sometimes if you are feeling stressed or tired, you don't want to have that story time, a poem. Just read a poem. My last pick, I have to go with a fairy tale book. And this one is one of my absolute favorites. This is Classic Fairy Tales. It's illustrated by Scott Gustafson. And the pictures are absolutely, let me see if I can find one for you. Look at this one from Snow White.
That's beautiful.
Isn't that so pretty? I almost want to take these out and like frame them. So like this one from Hansel and Gretel. How cute is that?
That's so cute.
Yeah, so the illustrations are just great. You could spend the whole story time just looking at the illustrations. So those are some of my favorites. I had a million more, but I'm like, edit, Shawna, edit.
It's hard. They're hard questions, but we're really happy to answer them. This has been so much fun.
I know. I want more questions.
Okay, so I have a question. Shawna, what's our next step for the podcast?
Okay, so Liz and I have talked about this quite extensively, and we've decided that our first season, I think, went really well, and we've had so much fun, and we've talked to great people, and we love our online community, but we are going to take a little break for August and September, and in that time, we're going to be recording some episodes for our second season, which will begin in October. So we are going to end our first season at the end of this month with our bookish brief for July. That will be our 20th episode, and that will put the little end cap on our season 1. And I think during that time, we're going to be trying to make some changes, things that we think we could do better or make it more fun and interesting and interactive with you guys. I know that we're planning on having a lot more. We are planning on having more people to interview, and these will be just everyday readers that have a genre that maybe Liz and I don't read, like graphic novels, or you like to read scripts or science fiction or things that we don't necessarily talk about, but we know you guys love. And so we want to bring you guys on our podcast and chat about these books. So Liz, where can they contact us if they would like to be on our episode?
So like Shawna said at the beginning, a great way to get in touch with us is through our email, which is gettingbookish.info@gmail.com. Or you can send us a message on our Facebook page if you're interested in coming on the podcast. And I'm really excited to chat with people who read all different kinds of books or just different kinds of readers. Maybe they read because they're editors, or maybe they are college professors, and they're just in such different places in their reading lives. I'm really excited to do some more interviews next season.
Yes, and I think that's what we mainly want to do, right? Because we want to reach out and actually chat with you guys, because from the times that we've had people on our podcast, I think those have been really fun. Interacting with people who have, I mean, you and I talk all the time. I feel like I could almost read you like a book. I'm such a nerd. But if we get, fresh perspectives, and, that might even open our eyes to books that maybe we necessarily wouldn't have tried or even encountered. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think we'll learn some things, and our listeners will learn things as well. So
yes. So next week will be our bookish brief for July. And then that will also be our final episode. So we hope that you tune in and catch us. And we have had such a blast on this first season, and we are excited to see what season 2 will bring us.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us.
Don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of the fun.
See you next week.